Okay, let's start on the concepts. Oops, hang on a sec. When you're looking at geography, and I mentioned this in sort of the first presentation, there's actually two types of geography, in the sense that geography falls down into sort of two subsets of the discipline. All of geography looks at the relationship of people in the world around them. Geograph, in the sense of geog, in the sense of place, and then the world. Human geography looks at it with the emphasis on people, so people as active agents. That's what this class is. The other half of geography, the other main branch of geography, would be physical geography, which looks at the physical aspects as the sort of primary area of focus. So, for example, you can look at sea level rise in two ways. You can look at sea level rise in terms of sea level rise, both in terms of what people have done to make it happen, and also how people are reacting to it. Or in a physical standpoint, you can just look at what are the actual physical impacts of sea level rise. Things like erosion, flooding, how does that change the relationship in terms of, for example, earthquakes, which you don't think about, but can be related to sea level rise in particular areas. So those are the two branches of geography. This particular course, we're looking at the people as agents, in other words, human geography. More accurately, most of what we're actually looking at in this semester would be a sub-branch of human geography, which is called cultural geography, which is basically groups of people as agents. Very rarely in this semester are we going to be looking at how one individual interacts with the world around them, because we're talking about this massive number of things that were in an intro class. And so in most cases, we're actually talking about what would be cultural geography, groups of people, cultures. In geography, regardless of whether you're talking about human or physical, there's three main concepts. And as with a lot of the concepts in geography, they're going to see all semester long. If you skim through this short book, you'll see a huge number of the terms in the book are words that are in common use that you probably use all the time. And we don't think of them as being technical terms, but to geography, they are technical terms, and geographers use them in very, very specific ways. So just be warned that when we're using these terms this semester, I expect you to use them in ways that the geographers would use them, rather than just sort of, someone who's, firing off a text about something. So there's three really main concepts in geography in terms of spatial concepts. And of course, all of geography in one way, shape, or form involves space, because you're looking at phenomena occurring in a particular bounded area. And so that's the concept of space. Space is the idea of basically an area that you've defined in terms of having boundaries. Now, the space could be personal space. The boundary area that in your particular group is the comfort zone that you consider, the area around you that is yours, and you don't want people, moving into it. Space could be your idea of, for example, your home. What does that actually include? Does it include the door? Does it include a fence outside? Then that would vary again from person to person, but collectively, for example, in American society, you talk about folks that trespass. And that means that what they've done is they've breached the area between what you might call public or general use and something that someone considers their private or family or personal use or personal space. So space, again, varies. Like as a concept, it's pretty easy. It's an area that's bounded. So if you ask someone what their personal space is, they can tell you, well, out till here. Or if you ask them what their personal property is in the sense of that space, they can show you, well, it's where the fence is or something. So space is something that you can define the edges of. So that's probably the most important. Well, yeah, space and place are both equally important, but it's important to remember that to geographers, space is a very useful technical term. The other technical term that gets used, of course, in English all the time is place. Place to geographers is a particular location that has importance. In other words, if you want to, it means something to somebody. Now, if you notice, this is incredibly subjective, because a location that might be a place to one person might be totally unintelligible or not interesting or not relevant to someone else. And this gets back to a really key thing, because if you think about that, that's also true of space. If you move from one culture to another, for example, there are different perceptions of personal space in terms of how big that zone is and what are transgressions of it. So all of these are very, very subjective, one, and two, they're very sort of situational in the sense of the people involved, the location involved. Place is very much the same thing. Place is very much a personalized concept. One person's place might be another person's area, or there's not bounded at all. So place is a location that has some meaning attached to it. So it's symbolically or meaning important. Now, one of the other complex aspects of both this and space then is if you move to someplace else. So for example, as we'll see in a second, if you go to Japan and you're not familiar at all with Japanese culture, then you're going to suddenly be hit by the fact that the Japanese don't use space and place in the same way that Americans do. But if you don't have any background with Japanese society or Japanese views of this, you're going to have no idea what the hell's going on, because their views of space and place to them make perfectly good sense, but they're not somehow marked out so that others can figure them out. In the same way that Japanese moving to the United States have exactly the same problem. Japanese views of space and place are radically different. When they come to the United States, they're not used to the idea of, for example, how Americans view personal space. They're not used to the same way bounded area. And they're certainly not going to recognize most American places that would be important to individuals. So because example, they don't know that person. So why would it look like a place? Let me give you an example here. Okay, here's an image. This is in Japan. This is a small temple. This is actually a pretty good sized temple in Takayama, which is a beautiful little town in the sort of southern mountain region, northwest of between Tokyo and, well, just northeast of Tokyo, figured that way, northwest of Tokyo. So here we've got part of the temple. Now, if you're not at all familiar with Japanese society, we'll just assume that you guys aren't, then what you see here won't make a lot of sense. There's obviously a bunch of trees and these sort of, little sheds, building, I don't know what you want to call them, sheds, maybe for lack of a better term, that you see there's 4 here, 1, 2, 3, 4. And this one here is not only larger, but it's actually got peavy leaving to it that the others don't. So, if you just think about it for a second, at some point, people in Japan that built these 4 little buildings obviously think they're different than, for example, the area in front, which doesn't have anything, or the area of the sign, which just have a signboard. So you can make some sort of guess that there's some reason for these buildings. But what they serve, what space they define, are the 4 of them attached to each other? Are they separate? Is there some reason they're next to each other in this particular location under these trees? That would be a spatial component that if you're not Japanese, and maybe, for example, not in this temple, you wouldn't be able to figure it out. It would just be a big question mark or a mystery. In terms of place, you can probably assume simply from the fact that these are, rather complex little structures, are obviously well kept. They've got things inside of them, or their doors that are protecting them. There's offerings here, that somehow this is a place. But you're not going to be able to make sense of the place because you don't understand Japanese religion, specifically in this case, Shinto. Even though this is a Buddhist temple, these are Shinto type shrines. So in that situation, you're sort of at a loss. And this is typical of what's important in geography. Space, place, and as we'll see, region are all designed in the point of view of the person that's looking at them or using them. They're not anything that's obvious to folks outside of that group. And this is a perfect case in point to someone who isn't Japanese. If you're a tourist here, this might be sort of interesting. It might be sort of cute, these little sort of tall house type things, but there's no meaning attached to them. So they're not really a place to you. If you're Japanese and from this area, then it's very possible one of these shrines is actually something that you're very personally attached to. It has a large amount of meaning to you, especially say New Year's or other times. And you might be one of the people that's leaving offerings here because there's something you won from the kami, or the spirit that resides in this particular structure, which is the Japanese attitude. So to the local Japanese here, each of these structures has a spirit living in it. And that spirit, if asked properly and treated properly with respect, may actually help you out in a situation. So, and to the folks that live around here, these are very serious places, and they happen to be next to each other just because those 4 spirits are, for whatever reason, there. But there's no spirit here. So it's very place specific where the spirits are. And you could argue that there's also a larger place, which is this shrine compound. And you could argue in that context also that maybe this would be a ritual space, that there's an area around here with a number of these ritual shrines which are all attached together and all part of the same sort of related logic to the folks that are there. In a larger context, and this gets to the third of these, we have the context of region. Region is a spatial area that is designed by some common factor. So for example, if you wanted to look at Shinto religious shrines, the region that had those would be the spatial area of Japan that has these religious shrines of this particular type in them. And so there'd be a boundary of that. There'd be, within the boundary would be places that have shrines. Outside that boundary, you're not going to find any other Shinto shrines. That would be region. So region is a larger concept than space usually, but the key aspect of region is you're looking at one thing in particular. If you're looking at trees of a particular species, and I have no idea what species of tree this is, then you could actually map out where those trees are. And that would be the region where you see this particular species of tree. And outside of that, you don't see the tree. So that's region is a concept. If you want to, it's a subset of space that is defined by one particular thing that you're using as the theme, I guess, that would be then the boundary that you have there. So space is a very general concept. And the key here is you will have boundaries, but it could be multiple things. Region tends to be very, very specific. Now, in a what you might call contemporary context outside of someplace like Japan, is region can be, for example, very frequently used in such areas, for example, as advertising. So if you're talking about the part of the United States that consumes Tampa Bay Buccaneers logo wear, that's going to be very regionally specific in the sense that there's only certain parts of the United States where people would purchase that stuff in general, and other parts of the United States, they probably wouldn't touch it because their loyalties are with another football team. That definition would be based on Tampa Bay Buccaneers goods or logo wear. So you can actually map that out. Now, if you're a marketer or someone in market advertising, then obviously it makes sense to go after that part of the United States, for example, that people buy that stuff, because spending your advertising money in an area that's into, San Francisco 49ers or, New England Patriots, it's a waste of your money. People aren't going to buy that stuff. Even if they might be interested, they probably wouldn't want to be seen dead in it. So in that situation, regionality is a huge part of what you call marketing and sort of consumerism. And so this is why you see regionally specific ads are actually tied to, they've done some sort of a research and they basically figured out that the people that buy, for example, this particular color of Toyota Prius or something like that are only in the Western states. Okay, well, fine, that becomes the region then where you sell that car. So this is actually a huge part of geography. A ton of geographers make their living off of looking at analyses of space and coming up with defined regions for marketing companies, marketing advertising companies. And because one, there's big money in it, and two, it's pure geography. You're looking at space, you're looking at the distributions of something in space, and then you're mapping those out and putting boundaries on it, saying, here's the area inside that you can make money off of. Outside, you're just wasting your money, so don't bother.